Okay, I hope I don't go ahead and kickstart World War III here with my recent videos about this Venezuela Guyana border dispute, right? But someone put something in the comments in one of the previous videos to this one, and it got me to thinking about a few things. Now, none of us were around when this border dispute all started ages ago, right? But if I had to go back and think over time what I think probably happened, here is my best guess, okay? Now, first of all, as I mentioned in one of the previous videos, the Spanish were the first Europeans to catch a glimpse of the northern coast of South America, right? Christopher Columbus. There may have been before him, but that's at least a recorded history that we do have. Now, when the Spanish came there, they originally went through the area or looked through the area that we call Guyana today looking for gold, the famous El Dorado. Well, they didn't find what they were looking for there in Guyana. All they found was just a bunch of forests, jungle. So the Spanish took their business and went to other places like what we call Peru today, or Central America, Venezuela, Colombia. They went to other places where they were able to find resources like gold. So the area you call Guyana was like an afterthought, like a backwater, like they weren't paying attention to it. Well, it allowed the Dutch to move into that area, right? The Dutch, who had established themselves for a few decades in what we call Brazil today, got kicked out by the Portuguese, and they scattered, and they ended up in places like what we call Guyana and Suriname today, right? So when they got over there, the first place they set up shop was on the, I may have this wrong, they set up shop on the Essequibo River, or it was on the Mazaruni River, which is to the west of the Essequibo River. And they built a fort there known as Kike Overall, which means view overall, because it gave them a nice commanding view of three of Guyana's, larger rivers. Well, that's where the Dutch were. So the Spanish knew the Dutch were there. And they sent a couple of patrols here and there to kind of like destroy a few Dutch settlements, but they never really enforced anything. And one of the reasons why they never enforced anything is because that area, if it was of Spanish territory, was way out there from the administrative centers that the Spanish would have had in what we call Venezuela today. So what the Spanish did eventually, they eventually struck a treaty with the Dutch somewhere in the mid-1600s. It was the Treaty of Munster, Munster. So when they struck this deal, they said, listen, you Dutch folks, the Essequibo River, this big river right here, which is in Guyana today, we'll give you that river and everything east of it. But they never went ahead and completed that thought and say, well, to the west of it belongs to us. I guess the assumption was the west of the river remains ours, Spanish territory, right? But again, the Spanish were not really paying attention to the area. The Dutch, on the other hand, because they had already established themselves within the immediate vicinity of the Essequibo River, continued to just live their lives as normal. So they eventually started settling on the western side of the Essequibo, which would be in Spanish land back then. But again, the Spanish were not paying attention. So eventually, the Dutch had settlements on both sides of the Essequibo River. And when they founded Stabroek, which is today Georgetown, Stabroek or Georgetown is only but so many miles away from the Essequibo River. Meanwhile, the capital city of Venezuela, which is Caracas, is actually 700 miles away from the current border that Guyana has today. And it's even further when you talk about the Essequibo River itself. That's how far away it was. So just imagine which one of these two empires you think would be more familiar with that region. You have Stabroek or Georgetown just a few miles away from the Essequibo, or Essequibo. And then you have Caracas in Venezuela, 700 miles away. So to say Spain or Venezuela was really paying attention to all that forested area out there 700 miles away, I don't think that was something they were paying attention. It wasn't pressing to them. But when the British came in, my thinking is that when the British came in and they had their negotiations with the Dutch to take over, when the British went out there to the western side of the Essequibo, they weren't seeing an area that was populated by a bunch of Venezuelans, or I should say Spanish folks. They probably saw a few Amerindians out there. But in terms of the actual Europeans living out there and their enslaved population, you most likely saw a bunch of Dutch settlements scattered all over the place on the eastern side of the Essequibo and on the western side. So if I'm the British, I'm coming in and I'm looking and I'm like, I want to establish a border over here on the western side. And I'm looking and you're saying to yourself, I'm taking this land over from the Dutch. And you go out there and you go to the west of the Essequibo, and when you're looking, you're just seeing Dutch settlement, Dutch folks, Dutch folks, Dutch folks, Dutch folks, all over the place. We're the Spanish folks. Oh no, they're 700 miles away in Caracas. They're all the way on the other side of the forest, way over there. There are not many of them out here. Because again, their concentration of people, their concentrated populations were further towards the coastline and further towards the west. Meanwhile, the Essequibo is way out there in the east, out in the jungle somewhere, out in the forested area somewhere, sparsely populated, far away from the administrative centers of Venezuela. Meanwhile, the Essequibo is a couple of miles up the street from Georgetown, a couple of miles up the street from Stabroek. So it makes more sense that the Dutch would be more familiar with that area and more likely to have settled the areas on both sides of the Essequibo River. So if I'm the British coming in now, I'm taking this land over from the Dutch, I am just looking out there and just realizing, okay, well, it might be Spanish territory. They may claim that it's Spanish territory, but they're not really paying attention to it. And I'm seeing all these Dutch people out here anyway. So I'm just going to figure it only makes logical sense. Dutch people, Dutch citizens, I'm taking over from the Dutch, might as well. This whole area out here, we're just going to consider it part of what we consider British Guyana. Now, the British were greedy. They were going as far as the Orinoco, but that's because the Dutch were all the way out there too. But eventually they kind of realized and they were like, okay, you know what? We'll leave it. We'll back off from the Orinoco River, back all the way back, and fall back as far back as, closer to the Essequibo River itself. But we'll take the lands, or we will go ahead and assume the land west of the Essequibo up to a certain point, and we'll assume the land east of the Essequibo River also. So again, we weren't around. This is just a theory of mine, but it would make sense to me. That is kind of like how things went. But I know it's not going to please the Venezuelans, because I know you guys want as much as you can get. And I know you're talking about the history and everything, and I do understand your point. I do understand your gripe. But seriously, do you think getting that land from Guyana is going to solve your problems tomorrow? You guys have bigger fish to fry. Guyana is a small country compared to yours. Guyana has a small population compared to yours. You have 24 million people. Guyana has about 800,000. Even if all the people from Guyana move back home, you're probably not going to even crack 3 million people. If all of Venezuela's people move back home, you guys are looking at probably 35 million or more, even way more than that. What more do you want? Just let Guyana be, man. That's how I look at it, okay? I'm not from the country, right? I don't really have a dog in the fight per se, even though my wife is from Guyana, but hey, just let Guyana have its day. Venezuela, you were once one of the wealthiest countries on the face of the earth. Go back and try to regain that former glory. Pay attention to that and do that all over again and get back to that point. Guyana is not going to do it for you.